Hi, I'm Dot from Dot to Trot, and today I'm going to make some sun-dried tomatoes. I absolutely love sun-dried tomatoes. They taste great. They're great in salads. They're great chopped up in, I use them in breads. I'll use them on top of my scrambled eggs. I use them in salads after I pack them in oil. The reason why I tend to make my own is because this batch of tomatoes I purchased cost me about $4 at the grocery store. They were on sale. Whereas a jar of sun-dried tomatoes probably would cost me about $8 for maybe about 4 ounces. Not very much. They're really expensive to buy at the grocery store, so making them yourselves is a really great way to save money, and then you can use them as you need them. Now, there's a couple of ways you can actually make your own sun-dried tomatoes. One is going old school, and that is actually setting them outside in the sun when it's more than 90 degrees out. Now, another way you can do this is put them in a dehydrator. That certainly is the fastest way of making them. I'm going to do the third option, which is actually making them in the oven. You just set it at a low temperature, anywhere from 200 to 250. I'm going to do 250 for mine. And you can make sun-dried tomatoes with any tomato. They could be green tomatoes, yellow tomatoes, any type of red tomato, cherry tomatoes. The cooking times just vary. The one thing you got to keep in mind is you really want ripe tomatoes, and you really want fleshy kind of tomatoes, because that'll help as it's cooking down and the liquid's evaporating out of it from the heat. It brings out the flavors a little bit more. Now, what you have to keep in mind is tomatoes. I love tomatoes, and plum tomatoes are great on a low-carb diet. They're very low in carbs. However, when you make them into sun-dried tomato, it can in fact boost the sugars. The sugars tend to come out more, so you can make them a little bit more carby. What you want to do is you don't eat a whole jar of them. You don't eat, if a recipe calls for a cup, that means you have a recipe that has a big serving size. You never eat, just don't eat them in mass. You just want them for a bit of flavor and even texture in your dishes. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and start chopping them up. So you just have to cut them in half. What I like to do, if the stem is a little bit stemmy or a little bit too woody, I'll actually cut it out. For larger ones like this, it's a pretty big one, I'll actually cut it like that. That'll help with the cooking time too when you do that type of chopping. But otherwise, I'm going to leave them pretty good size. Actually, I'm filling up pretty quickly, so I'm going to get my tray. I'm going to put my tomatoes on for baking or for drying. And you just put them on your tray. You want them about an inch apart or half an inch apart. Yeah, I'm going to go there. You want them cut side up, because you're going to season this side with some salt. That's one tray. Down. I'm going to season it when I get all the tomatoes done. Let's put out the other tray. I put it on parchment paper again, so I don't have any problem with them sticking. I'm going to go ahead, move my chopping board out of the way, and I'm going to flavor them. And pretty much what I'm going to do to flavor them is just kosher salt and a little bit of pepper. I'm not going to use all the salt. It really is just a little bit on each tomato. You just sprinkle it on. Again, the nice thing about salt, it helps bring out the moisture. Okay, I'm going to add a little bit of pepper for, again, flavor. This I'll add pretty quickly. Don't need to add again that much, because the flavor of the tomatoes will really come out on their own. So they are seasoned and they are ready to go in the oven. The oven's on. I set my oven at 250. My magnet got attached to that. So I'm going to go ahead and put these in the oven. The temperature is really low. I'll check on them periodically every couple of hours, but for a batch like this, it can go anywhere from 5 to 10 hours for cooking. But at the end, you'll get some wonderful, tasty sun-dried tomatoes at the end of it that you can use again in salads, or any type of dish that you just want to have that flavor that just pops. So we'll come back in a few hours and we'll check on them, see how they're going. We're back, and the sun-dried tomatoes I took them out of the oven, and you can see they look wonderful. I did leave them a little bit moist, and that's fine. You can certainly leave them I could have left them in the oven a lot longer to get all of the moisture out, but I didn't want to do it this time around. I sort of like mine a little bit more moist and a little softer. I just like the flavor that way. Now, I pulled out what I needed for a recipe that I'm going to be making this morning, which is a quiche. I'm going to be using a half a cup of sun-dried tomatoes, so I got that there. For my other tomatoes, what I decided to do was go ahead and just soak them in olive oil. And for flavoring, I added fresh basil and garlic cloves. About 3 garlic cloves are in here. What you do ahead of time is you actually go ahead and fill up the jar a little bit with your fresh herb, and also garlic if you're using it. That way it starts taking on the flavor of those herbs that you're using before you even put the tomatoes in. The tomatoes now are just sort of gravy. It just adds even more flavor. And also when you pack them in oil, they can keep a lot longer in the fridge than if you just stored them, in the fridge, in a bag or in a container with as much air out as possible. They mold quicker, especially when there's a little bit of moisture in there. But when you're packed like this, they last for a while. The only downside, I guess you can call it that, is I use extra virgin olive oil. Is that when you put it in the fridge, obviously olive oil starts solidifying because of the cold. That's not really that big of a deal because I use this for either making salad dressings, making pestos, some type of spreads. So you just take a scoop out, and if you want any tomato or any of the herbs in there, go right ahead. You just scoop it out and leave it out at room temperature, and it'll liquefy fairly quickly. The olive oil will. So again, it's really simple to make this. It does take time. Just keep that in mind. These took me about 6.5, 7 hours to do for about 13 plum tomatoes. You can, it can go either longer or shorter depending on how much moisture or water is in those tomatoes, and especially the type of tomatoes you're using. Some of them have way more water than others. But it's an easy, fun little project to do at home, and it's something you definitely should go ahead and try. So with that, I will start working on another project, but till then, I'll see you in a bit. Bye.